Sometimes a single moment can reveal the incredible strength hidden beneath what appears to be ordinary. What you're about to hear is the story of Maya Chen, a 24-year-old woman whose quiet demeanor concealed a past that would leave even the toughest individuals speechless. This isn't just a story about surviving trauma. It's about the extraordinary courage it takes to rebuild your life when everything has been taken from you. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya had always been the type of person who preferred to blend into the background. Standing at just 5'4" with shoulder-length black hair that she often tucked behind her ears when nervous, she possessed an almost ethereal quality that made people want to protect her. Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper most days, and she had a habit of pulling her sleeves down over her hands whenever she felt uncomfortable. Those who knew her described her as gentle, kind, and incredibly intelligent, but there was something in her dark brown eyes that hinted at depths most people never got to see. After graduating with a degree in computer science from a prestigious university, Maya had landed a job at a tech startup in downtown Seattle. The work was demanding, but fulfilling, and for the first time in years, she felt like she was building something resembling a normal life. She had a small apartment with a view of the Sound, a few close friends from work, and a routine that gave her the stability she desperately craved. But despite her professional success, Maya struggled with something that had haunted her for years: a complete lack of physical confidence and an overwhelming fear of confrontation. The decision to join the self-defense class hadn't come easily. For months, Maya had walked past the martial arts studio on her way to work, watching through the large windows as students practiced various techniques. The instructor, a woman named Sarah Martinez, looked to be in her 40s, with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and arms that spoke of years of dedicated training. There was something about Sarah's teaching style that drew Maya in. She was firm but patient, pushing her students while also creating an environment where they felt safe to learn. It was Maya's coworker and friend, Jessica, who finally convinced her to sign up. You don't have to be the strongest person in the room. You just need to know that you can defend yourself if you have to. Besides, it might help with that confidence thing you're always talking about. Maya had nodded, knowing Jessica was right, but the thought of putting herself in a vulnerable position, of potentially having to explain why certain movements made her freeze up or why sudden loud noises caused her to flinch, filled her with anxiety. The first few classes had gone better than expected. Maya showed up early and stayed in the back, following along as best she could, while trying to remain invisible. She wore long-sleeve shirts and pants, even when the studio got warm, and she always positioned herself where she had a clear view of all the exits. Sarah seemed to understand that Maya needed space and time, never calling on her directly or putting her on the spot, but Maya could feel the instructor's watchful eye tracking her progress. What Maya hadn't expected was how much she would actually enjoy the physical challenge. Despite her small frame, she was surprisingly quick and had excellent balance. Her background in dance from childhood served her well, and she found that her body remembered how to move with grace and precision. More importantly, learning these defensive techniques gave her a sense of empowerment she hadn't felt in years. For the first time since her world had been shattered, Maya began to believe that she might actually be capable of protecting herself. The other students in the class were a diverse group. There was Marcus, a college student who wanted to feel safer walking across campus at night, Linda, a real estate agent who often showed properties alone, David, a businessman who traveled frequently, and several other women of various ages who had their own reasons for being there. Most of them were friendly enough, though Maya rarely engaged in the pre-class chatter or stayed around afterward for the social aspects of training. Sarah's teaching philosophy focused on practical, real-world scenarios rather than flashy martial arts moves. She emphasized that self-defense was as much about awareness and avoidance as it was about physical techniques. The best fight, she would often tell the class, is the one you never have to have. But when physical confrontation was unavoidable, she taught them to be decisive, aggressive, and never give up no matter how outmatched they might seem. As the weeks progressed, Maya found herself growing stronger, both physically and mentally. She was sleeping better, standing a little taller, and beginning to feel like she might actually be healing from wounds that had seemed permanently etched into her soul. The nightmares that had plagued her for years were becoming less frequent, and she was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could leave her past behind and build the future she had always dreamed of. But Maya's journey toward healing was about to take an unexpected turn, one that would force her to confront not only her own demons, but also the assumptions and prejudices of others. Sometimes the most profound moments of human connection come from the most unexpected places, and sometimes it takes having your defenses literally stripped away to reveal the warrior that was hiding underneath. By her third month at the studio, Maya had developed a routine that worked for her. She would arrive 15 minutes before class, spend a few minutes stretching in the corner, and then position herself in the back row where she could see everything happening around her. Her movements had become more fluid, more confident, and she was beginning to master some of the more complex techniques Sarah was teaching. The other students had grown accustomed to her quiet presence, and while she still didn't socialize much, she no longer felt completely out of place. Sarah had begun to notice Maya's progress as well. During partner exercises, Maya demonstrated an intuitive understanding of leverage and timing that surprised even the instructor. Her small size, which she had always seen as a disadvantage, actually worked in her favor when it came to certain defensive maneuvers. She was learning to use an attacker's size and momentum against them, to slip out of holds that would trap larger people, and to streak quickly and effectively at vulnerable points. "Maya," Sarah called out one evening after a particularly intense session on ground fighting techniques, "could you stay after class for a minute? I'd like to talk to you." Maya's heart immediately began racing. Had she done something wrong? Had Sarah noticed the way she sometimes froze up during certain exercises? The way she always kept her sleeves pulled down, even when everyone else was rolling them up in the heated studio? Maya nodded silently, gathering her water bottle and towel while the other students filtered out, chatting about their plans for the weekend. Once they were alone, Sarah's expression softened. "You've made incredible progress these past few months," she began, leaning against the mirrored wall. "Your technique is getting really solid, and your instincts are surprisingly sharp. I think you're ready to start working on some more advanced scenarios." Maya felt a mixture of pride and anxiety. She was pleased that Sarah had noticed her improvement, but the thought of advanced scenarios made her stomach clench. "What kind of scenarios?" she asked quietly. Sarah smiled reassuringly. "Nothing too intense, but I think it's time we worked on some full contact exercises. Up until now, you've been practicing the movements, but you haven't really experienced what it feels like when someone is actually trying to grab you, restrain you, or attack you. It's important that you know how your body will react under real stress." The color drained from Maya's face. The idea of someone actually grabbing her, of being restrained or overpowered, brought back memories she had worked so hard to suppress. But she also knew that Sarah was right. If she was ever going to truly be able to defend herself, she needed to experience these situations in a controlled environment where she could learn to manage her panic and respond effectively. "I understand if that makes you uncomfortable," Sarah continued, reading the fear in Maya's eyes. "We can take it slow, and you can stop any time you need to, but I really think you're ready for this next step." Maya took a deep breath, fighting back the familiar wave of anxiety that was threatening to overwhelm her. "Okay," she whispered. "I trust you." Sarah's face lit up with a proud smile. "Great! We'll start next week. I'm going to pair you with some of our more experienced students who understand the importance of creating a safe learning environment. Remember, the goal isn't to hurt you or to make you feel helpless. The goal is to help you discover just how capable you really are." Over the next several classes, Sarah gradually introduced Maya to more realistic training scenarios. At first, it was simple things like having a partner grab her wrist and hold on while she practiced escape techniques. Maya's initial attempts were clumsy, her movements hindered by the panic that would surge through her body the moment she felt trapped. But Sarah was patient, talking her through each technique, reminding her to breathe, to think, to trust in the training. "Your body knows what to do," Sarah would say during these sessions. "You've practiced these movements hundreds of times. Don't let your mind override your muscle memory. Trust yourself." Slowly, Maya began to improve. She learned to channel her anxiety into focused aggression, to use her fear as fuel rather than letting it paralyze her. She discovered that she was much stronger than she had ever believed, and that her small size could actually be an advantage in certain situations. When someone grabbed her, she could slip out of their hold before they could adjust their grip. When someone tried to restrain her from behind, she could strike backwards with surprising force and accuracy. The other students in the advanced group were supportive and encouraging. Marcus, who had become something of a training partner for Maya, was particularly good at pushing her just hard enough to make her improve without overwhelming her. "You're like a little ninja," he would joke after she successfully executed a particularly complex escape. "I barely saw you move, and suddenly I'm on the ground wondering what happened." But it was during a particularly intense training session on a humid Thursday evening that everything changed. Sarah had decided it was time for Maya to experience what she called stress inoculation, training scenarios designed to simulate the chaos and unpredictability of a real attack. The studio was packed with students, the energy level was high, and multiple training exercises were happening simultaneously across the floor. Maya had been paired with Jake, a newer student who was enthusiastic but still learning to control his strength and intensity. Sarah had given them a specific scenario to practice. Jake would grab Maya from behind in a bear hug, and Maya would execute the escape technique they had been working on all week. It should have been routine, just another training exercise in a long series of progressively challenging situations. But sometimes, even in the safest environments, unexpected things happen that can change everything in an instant. The evening had started like any other advanced training session. The studio was filled with the familiar sounds of students practicing techniques, the slap of bare feet on mats, and Sarah's voice calling out corrections and encouragement. Maya had felt more confident than usual, her recent progress giving her a sense of accomplishment she hadn't experienced in years. She was finally beginning to believe that she might actually be capable of defending herself if the need ever arose. Jake was a decent training partner, though he sometimes got a bit too enthusiastic during exercises. He was about 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and arms that spoke of regular gym sessions. Sarah had paired them together because Jake needed practice controlling his strength, and Maya needed experience dealing with larger opponents. It seemed like a good match for both of their learning objectives. "All right, everyone," Sarah called out across the studio. "We're going to work on defending against rear bear hugs. Remember, the key is to act quickly before your attacker can fully secure their grip. Maya and Jake, you're up first. Show everyone how it's done." Maya nodded, taking her position in the center of the mat. She had practiced this scenario dozens of times over the past few weeks. The technique was straightforward. Drop your center of gravity, drive your elbow back into your attacker's solar plexus, step to the side to break their balance, and then turn to face them with your hands up in a defensive position. She had executed it successfully countless times during practice. Jake positioned himself behind her, placing his arms around her torso in preparation for the bear hug. "Ready?" he asked quietly, and Maya nodded. Sarah gave the signal to begin, and Jake tightened his grip around Maya's midsection, simulating an actual attack. For a moment, everything went according to plan. Maya felt the familiar surge of adrenaline as Jake's arms encircled her, but instead of panic, she felt focused and determined. She began to execute the escape sequence just as she had practiced, dropping her weight and preparing to drive her elbow backwards. But then something went wrong. Whether it was the humidity in the studio, the slight dampness from sweat on both of their bodies, or simply bad timing, Jake's grip slipped just as Maya was beginning her escape. In an attempt to maintain the hold and continue the exercise, he reached forward more aggressively, his hands grasping for purchase wherever they could find it. In that split second of adjustment, Jake's fingers caught the fabric of Maya's long-sleeved training shirt. The material, already stretched from weeks of wear and washing, couldn't withstand the sudden tension. There was a loud tearing sound that cut through the noise of the studio, and Maya's shirt ripped dramatically from the bottom hem nearly to her shoulder, leaving her arm completely exposed. The effect was immediate and devastating. Maya's carefully constructed armor, the long sleeves that had protected her secret for months, was suddenly gone. Her left arm was completely visible to everyone in the studio, and what they saw made the entire room fall silent. Her arm was covered in scars, not the thin white lines of old accidents, but the thick raised patterns that could only come from severe burns. The scars started just above her wrist and continued up past her elbow, covering nearly her entire forearm in a patchwork of damaged skin that told a story of unimaginable trauma. Some of the scars were smooth and shiny, indicating skin grafts, while others were puckered and discolored, showing where the burns had been deepest. The silence in the studio was deafening. Every student, every training pair had stopped what they were doing to stare at Maya's exposed arm. Some of them gasped audibly, while others simply stood frozen trying to process what they were seeing. The scars were extensive and severe, the kind that could only come from prolonged exposure to extreme heat, and they told a story that no one in that room had been prepared to witness. But it was Sarah's reaction that Maya would remember most vividly. The instructor, who had seen her share of trauma and hardship in her years of teaching self-defense, went completely pale. Her face drained of all color as she took in the full extent of the scarring on Maya's arm. Sarah had suspected that Maya had experienced some kind of trauma in her past. The woman's hypervigilance, her reluctance to engage in physical contact, her need to always know where the exits were, but nothing had prepared her for this visual evidence of such severe abuse. Maya looked down at her exposed arm, then up at the sea of shocked faces surrounding her. The familiar wave of shame and humiliation crashed over her like a tsunami. This was her worst nightmare, the scenario she had worked so hard to avoid. All of her careful planning, her long sleeves, her positioning in the back of the class, her quiet demeanor designed to avoid attention, all of it had been destroyed in a single moment of torn fabric. For several seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound in the studio was Maya's increasingly rapid breathing as she began to hyperventilate. Her chest rose and fell in quick, shallow gasps, and her eyes darted frantically around the room, looking for an escape route, looking for somewhere to hide, looking for any way to make this nightmare stop. The secret she had guarded so carefully, the past she had worked so hard to leave behind, was now exposed for everyone to see, and in that moment, Maya felt more vulnerable and terrified than she had since the day those scars were first burned into her skin.
The silence that followed seemed to stretch for eternity, though in reality, it lasted only a few seconds. Maya stood frozen in the center of the mat, her scarred arm exposed to the entire class, feeling as though every eye in the room was burning into her damaged skin. The familiar panic was rising in her chest, the same overwhelming terror that had consumed her during those dark months years ago when the burns were fresh and her world had been reduced to hospital rooms and pain medication. Jake, who had been standing behind her when the shirt tore, was the first to break the spell. "Oh my God, Maya, I'm so sorry," he stammered, his voice thick with shock and guilt. I didn't mean, I was just trying to... Your shirt." He looked down at the torn fabric in his hands as if he couldn't quite understand how it had gotten there. But Maya barely heard him. Her mind was spiraling back to a place she had worked so hard to escape, back to the night when her entire life had been consumed by flames and the sound of her own screaming. Her breathing became more rapid and shallow, and she could feel her vision starting to tunnel. The walls of the studio seemed to be closing in around her, and the faces of her classmates blurred together into a sea of judgment and pity. It was Sarah who finally broke through Maya's panic. The instructor moved swiftly across the mat, positioning herself between Maya and the staring students. With quick practice movements, Sarah stripped off her own jacket and wrapped it around Maya's shoulders, covering the exposed scars and giving her some semblance of protection. Everyone back to your exercises, Sarah commanded, her voice carrying an authority that brooked no argument. Now. The students slowly began to move, though many continued to glance in Maya's direction with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Sarah waited until most of the attention had shifted away before gently placing her hand on Maya's uninjured shoulder. Maya, look at me. Focus on my voice. You're safe here. You're in the studio, surrounded by people who care about you. Whatever happened to you, it's in the past. You're safe now. Maya's eyes slowly focused on Sarah's face, finding an anger in the instructor's calm, steady gaze. Sarah had seen trauma before. In her years of teaching self-defense, she had worked with survivors of domestic violence, assaults, and other forms of abuse. But the extent of Maya's scarring suggested something far more severe than anything Sarah had encountered before. "Can you breathe with me?" Sarah asked, demonstrating slow, deep breaths. In through your nose, out through your mouth. That's it. Just focus on breathing. Gradually, Maya's breathing began to slow and deepen, and the crushing weight of panic started to lift. "I need to go," Maya whispered, her voice barely audible. "I can't. Everyone saw. I need to leave." "You don't have to go anywhere," Sarah replied gently, "but if you want to, that's okay too. Whatever you need right now, we'll make it happen." She paused, studying Maya's face carefully. "Would you like to talk? Not here, obviously, but maybe in my office, or we could grab coffee somewhere quiet." Maya looked around the studio, noting that while most students had returned to their training, several were still casting glances in her direction. She could practically feel their questions hanging in the air. How did she get those scars? What happened to her? Was she in some kind of accident? The speculation and curiosity felt almost as invasive as the original exposure. "Coffee," Maya said finally. "Somewhere quiet. Somewhere they can't stare." Sarah nodded understandingly. "There's a small cafe about 3 blocks from here. Very low-key, lots of privacy. Why don't you get changed, and we can walk over there together. Take all the time you need." 20 minutes later, Maya and Sarah sat across from each other in a corner booth at the Moonlight Cafe, a small establishment that catered to artists and writers looking for a peaceful place to work. Maya had changed back into her street clothes, a long-sleeve sweater that covered her arms completely, and was clutching a cup of chamomile tea as if it were a lifeline. "You don't have to tell me anything," Sarah began, her voice gentle but clear. "But I want you to know that whatever happened to you, it doesn't change how I see you as a student or as a person. If anything, the fact that you've been training despite carrying that kind of trauma makes you one of the bravest people I've ever met." Maya was quiet for a long moment, staring into her tea as if it might hold answers to questions she had never been able to ask. Finally, she looked up at Sarah with eyes that held years of pain and carefully guarded secrets. "It was my stepfather," she said simply, her voice barely above a whisper. "He did this to me." The words hung in the air between them, carrying the weight of unspeakable trauma. Sarah felt her stomach clench as the full implications of Maya's scarring became clear. These weren't the result of an accident or a house fire. They were the deliberate infliction of torture on a child by someone who should have protected her. "How old were you?" Sarah asked quietly. 14 when it started, 16 when it ended. Maya's hands tightened around her teacup, her knuckles white with the effort of holding herself together. "My mother worked nights, so it was usually just him and me at home. He had problems. Anger problems, drinking problems. And when he got really angry, when the belt and the fists weren't enough," she trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes, but she forced them back. Maya needed her to be strong right now, to be a safe harbor in the storm of emotions that must be raging through her. "How did it end?" Sarah asked gently. "A neighbor finally called the police, Mrs. Chen from next door. She heard me screaming one night and decided she couldn't ignore it anymore. By the time the paramedics got there, I was unconscious from the pain. 3rd-degree burns over 60% of my body."
Maya's voice was matter-of-fact, as if she were recounting someone else's story. I spent 8 months in the hospital, 17 surgeries, skin grafts, physical therapy, psychological counseling. Sarah shook her head in amazement. And your stepfather? Prison. 25 to life. My mother, Maya's voice caught slightly, blamed me, said I must have done something to provoke him. I went into foster care after I got out of the hospital. The enormity of what Maya had survived was staggering. Sarah had worked with many trauma survivors, but she had never encountered someone who had endured such systematic, prolonged abuse and managed to rebuild their life so completely. The fact that Maya had not only survived, but had gone to college, built a career, and was actively working to overcome her fears by taking self-defense classes spoke to a strength of character that was almost incomprehensible.
As Maya continued to share her story in the quiet corner of the cafe, Sarah began to understand the incredible journey that had brought this young woman to her studio. The scars on Maya's arms were only the visible evidence of trauma that ran much deeper. Psychological wounds that had taken years of therapy and tremendous personal strength to begin healing. After I aged out of foster care at 18, I was pretty much on my own, Maya continued, her voice growing slightly stronger as she spoke. I had gotten a full academic scholarship to university, which was basically my lifeline. College became my escape, my chance to reinvent myself completely. I studied computer science because it was something I could do alone, behind a screen, where nobody had to see my scars or ask questions about my past. Sarah listened intently, occasionally sipping her coffee, but never taking her eyes off Maya's face. She was beginning to understand why Maya had always worn long sleeves to class, why she positioned herself near the exits, why certain training exercises made her freeze up. The hypervigilance that Sarah had initially attributed to general anxiety was actually a sophisticated survival mechanism developed by someone who'd learned the hard way that safety was never guaranteed. The hardest part wasn't even the physical recovery, Maya went on. The burns healed eventually, mostly, but learning to trust people again, learning to believe that not everyone wanted to hurt me, that took much longer. I went through years of therapy, different medications for anxiety and depression, support groups for abuse survivors. Some days were better than others. What made you decide to take self-defense classes? Sarah asked gently. That must have been a terrifying decision for someone with your history. Maya smiled sadly. It was terrifying, but I was tired of being afraid all the time. Tired of jumping every time someone walked up behind me, tired of checking locks 3 times before going to bed, tired of having nightmares about being trapped and helpless. I thought maybe if I knew I could defend myself, if I knew I wasn't completely powerless, some of the fear might go away. And has it helped? More than I ever expected it to. Maya's expression brightened slightly. For the first time since I was a kid, I actually feel strong. Not just physically, but mentally too. When I successfully complete one of your training scenarios, when I manage to escape from a hold or execute a technique properly, it proves to me that I'm not that helpless 14-year-old girl anymore. I'm someone who can fight back. Sarah nodded, finally understanding why Maya's progress in class had been so remarkable. She wasn't just learning self-defense techniques, she was reclaiming her own power, proving to herself that she was no longer a victim. Every successful escape, every properly executed strike was a victory over the trauma that had defined her life for so many years. Maya, Sarah said carefully, I have to ask, are you okay with continuing your training? After what happened tonight, I mean. I completely understand if you need to take a break or if you'd prefer to train privately or even if you want to stop altogether. Maya was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. The exposure of her scars was traumatic. There was no denying that. The looks of shock and pity from her classmates had brought back all the familiar feelings of shame and self-consciousness that she had worked so hard to overcome.
But as she sat there in the peaceful cafe, wrapped in Sarah's jacket and surrounded by the instructor's unwavering support, Maya realized something important. She didn't want to run away. "I want to keep training," she said finally, her voice filled with quiet determination. "I've spent too many years hiding from my past, letting my scars define what I could and couldn't do. Tonight was horrible, yes, but maybe it was also necessary. Maybe I needed to stop hiding." "Are you sure?" Sarah asked. "The other students will have questions. They'll be curious. Some of them might treat you differently." "Then I'll deal with that too," Maya replied with more confidence than she had felt in years. "I'm tired of being ashamed of surviving. These scars are proof that I'm a fighter, that I refuse to give up even when someone was literally trying to destroy me. Maybe it's time I stopped seeing them as something to hide." Sarah felt a surge of pride and admiration for the young woman sitting across from her. In the space of a single conversation, she had witnessed Maya transform from a victim trying to hide her past to a survivor ready to reclaim her story. It was one of the most powerful displays of personal courage Sarah had ever encountered. "What do you think will happen when you go back to class?" Sarah asked. Maya considered the question thoughtfully. "I think some people will be uncomfortable. Some might ask questions I'm not ready to answer. Others might treat me like I'm fragile, like I might break if they train too hard with me. But there will also be people who understand, people who see my scars and recognize strength instead of weakness." And Jake, he seemed pretty shaken up by what happened. "Jake made a mistake, but it wasn't malicious. Accidents happen in training. That's why we call them accidents. I don't blame him for my shirt tearing, and I don't want him to blame himself either. If anything, maybe this will teach him to be more careful with his training partners, which is probably a lesson he needed to learn anyway." Sarah smiled at Maya's response. Even in the aftermath of such a traumatic exposure, she was showing remarkable compassion and insight. "You know," Sarah said, "I think you might be exactly what our class needs. We talk a lot about self-defense and personal safety, but we don't often discuss the psychological aspects of survival. Your perspective, your experience, could help other people understand that true strength isn't about physical power. It's about the courage to keep going when everything seems hopeless." Maya looked surprised by the suggestion. "You think I could help other people?" "I think you already are just by being there. But yes, if you ever wanted to share your story more formally, I think it could be incredibly powerful for other students to hear. Not tonight, obviously, and not until you're ready. But when you are, I think your voice could make a real difference." 2 days passed before Maya returned to the studio. She had spent those days in her apartment, alternating between moments of determination and waves of anxiety about facing her classmates again. She had called in sick to work, something she rarely did, and had spent hours staring at her scarred arms in the mirror, trying to reconcile the woman she had become with the traumatized teenager who had first acquired those marks. Jessica, her coworker and friend, had stopped by on the second day with takeout Chinese food and moral support. "You don't have to go back if you're not ready," Jessica had said, settling onto Maya's couch with containers of lo mein and sweet and sour chicken. "But you also shouldn't let one bad moment undo all the progress you've made." "It's not just one bad moment, though," Maya had replied, picking at her food without much appetite. "It's everything that moment represents. All the questions people will have, all the assumptions they'll make about me. Some of them will see me as damaged goods. Others will treat me like I'm made of glass. I just want to be treated like a normal person learning self-defense." "Then teach them how to do that," Jessica had suggested. "You get to control the narrative here. You can decide how much or how little you want to share, and you can set the boundaries for how people interact with you. The Maya I know doesn't run away from challenges. She faces them head on." Those words had stayed with Maya as she prepared to return to class. She chose her outfit carefully. A fitted, long-sleeved shirt that couldn't easily tear,
comfortable training pants, and her usual athletic shoes. She arrived at the studio 15 minutes early, as was her habit, but instead of stretching in the corner, she positioned herself near the center of the room where she would be clearly visible to everyone. Sarah noticed her immediately and approached with a cautious but warm smile. "How are you feeling?" she asked quietly. "Nervous, but determined. I've decided I'm not going to hide anymore." "That's incredibly brave of you. Just remember, you don't owe anyone explanations. You share what you want to share when you want to share it." As other students began filtering into the studio, Maya could feel their eyes on her. Some glances were subtle, quick looks followed by whispered conversations with training partners. Others were more direct, open stares that made it clear people were trying to reconcile the Maya they thought they knew with what they had glimpsed 2 nights earlier. Jake approached her first, looking genuinely distressed. "Maya, I am so sorry about what happened. I've been feeling terrible about it. I should have been more careful, should have—" Maya held up her hand to stop him. "Jake, it was an accident. You didn't do anything wrong. I'm not angry with you, and I don't want you to be angry with yourself. These things happen in training." "But she started to say, then stopped himself. "My scars?" Maya said calmly. "Yes, they're there. They're part of who I am, but they don't define me. I hope we can continue training together without it being weird." Yes, of course. Thank you for being so understanding." Marcus came over next, his usual jovial demeanor tempered with genuine concern. "Hey, Maya, I just wanted to say that whatever you've been through, you're one of the strongest people I know. The way you train, the way you've improved, it's been inspiring to watch." Maya felt tears prick at her eyes, but they were tears of gratitude rather than shame. "Thank you, Marcus. That means a lot." As class began, Sarah made a point of treating Maya exactly as she always had, with respect, appropriate challenges, and the same expectations for performance. She didn't coddle her or single her out for special treatment. If anything, she pushed Maya slightly harder than usual, as if to reinforce the message that nothing fundamental had changed about their training relationship. The exercises that night focused on ground fighting and escape techniques, scenarios that required close physical contact and trust between training partners. Maya found herself paired with Linda, the real estate agent, who had always been friendly but somewhat reserved in her interactions. "Are you comfortable with this? I don't want to do anything that might be triggering for you." Maya appreciated the consideration, but she also recognized it as exactly the kind of treatment she wanted to avoid. "Linda, I need you to train with me the same way you would with anyone else. Don't hold back because of my scars. The whole point of me being here is to learn to handle real situations, and real attackers aren't going to go easy on me because of my history." Linda nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. "You're right. I'm sorry. I was trying to be sensitive, but I guess that's not what you need right now." "What I need," Maya said with a small smile, "is for people to see me as capable of handling whatever they can dish out. So, bring your best game." The training session that followed was intense and productive. Maya found herself more focused than she had been in weeks, as if the removal of her secret had also removed a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying. She moved with greater confidence, struck with more precision, and escaped from holds with a fluidity that even Sarah impressed. During a break between exercises, David, the businessman, approached her. "Maya, I hope this isn't inappropriate, but I wanted to tell you something. My sister went through an abusive relationship a few years ago. Nothing as severe as what you've clearly survived, but seeing you here, training, refusing to let your past define your future, I think she could really benefit from meeting someone like you, someone who shows that it's possible to reclaim your power." Maya was touched by his words, but also surprised by the suggestion. "I'm not sure I'm the right person to help anyone else. I'm still figuring things out myself." "Sometimes," David replied, "the best teachers are the ones who are still learning." As the class progressed, Maya began to notice something remarkable happening.
Rather than treating her differently because of her scars, many of her classmates seemed to be training with greater intensity and focus, as if witnessing evidence of real trauma had reminded them why they were all there, not just for exercise or self-improvement, but to prepare for the possibility that they might one day need these skills to survive. During partner exercises, Maya found herself demonstrating techniques with a precision and determination that came from lived experience rather than just theoretical knowledge. When she showed someone how to break free from a wrist grab, they could see in her movements the understanding of what it really meant to need that escape. When she practiced striking vulnerable points, there was an edge to her techniques that spoke of someone who knew the difference between training and survival. Sarah noticed the change not just in Maya, but in the entire class dynamic. The presence of someone who had clearly survived real trauma brought a gravity and authenticity to their training that had been missing before. Students were asking better questions, training with more serious intent, and supporting each other with greater compassion and understanding. Near the end of class, Sarah called everyone together for the usual closing discussion. Instead of the typical review of techniques, she decided to address the elephant in the room directly. "I want to talk about something that happened earlier this week," she began, her eyes finding Maya's and receiving a subtle nod of permission to continue. "One of our students accidentally had some very personal, very painful history exposed during training. I'm not going to go into details because that's not my story to tell, but I do want to address how we as a class community respond to situations like this." She paused, looking around the room at the attentive faces of her students. Self-defense training attracts people from all walks of life, with all kinds of histories. Some of you are here because you want to feel more confident walking alone at night. Others are here because you've had scary encounters and want to be better prepared. And some of you are here because you've already survived things that most people can't even imagine. Maya felt her heart racing, but not with panic this time, with something that felt almost like pride. "What I want you to understand," she continued, "is that survival isn't just about the techniques we practice in this room. It's about the courage to keep moving forward when everything seems hopeless. It's about the strength to rebuild your life after it's been shattered. And it's about the determination to refuse to let anyone else's actions define who you become." She looked directly at Maya as she spoke her next words. "Some of the strongest people I've ever known are the ones who have survived the unthinkable and chosen to keep fighting anyway. They have something the rest of us can only hope to develop. They know what real strength looks like because they've had to find it in themselves when everything else was stripped away." The room was silent, but it was a different kind of silence than the shocked quiet that had followed Maya's exposure 2 nights earlier. This was a silence of respect, of understanding, of a group of people recognizing that they were in the presence of something extraordinary. So, when you train with someone who has survived real trauma, don't treat them like they're fragile. Don't assume they need your protection or your pity. Recognize that they've already proven themselves to be fighters in ways most of us never will. Train with them as equals, learn from their strength, and honor their courage by bringing your best effort to every exercise. As the class ended and students began to gather their belongings, Maya found herself surrounded by her classmates. But instead of the awkward questions or pitying looks she had expected, she received something much more valuable: acceptance, respect, and the recognition that she belonged exactly where she was. In the weeks following her return to class, Maya experienced a transformation that surprised even her. The fear of discovery that had haunted her for months was gone, replaced by something she hadn't expected: a sense of liberation. For the first time since she was 14 years old, she didn't have to carefully monitor every movement, every sleeve, every position to ensure her scars remained hidden. The secret that had controlled so much of her life was out, and rather than destroying her, it had somehow set her free. Her training improved dramatically during this period. Without the constant anxiety of protecting her secret, Maya was able to focus entirely on technique and execution. Sarah noticed the change immediately. Maya's movements were more fluid, her reactions quicker, and her confidence in high-pressure situations had increased exponentially. She was no longer holding back part of herself in reserve to maintain her carefully constructed facade. "You're like a completely different fighter," Marcus observed one evening after a particularly intense sparring session. "I mean, you were good before, but now it's like you're training with your whole self instead of just part of it." Maya smiled at the observation because she knew it was true. "I think I was spending so much energy hiding who I was that I didn't have enough left over to become who I could be," she replied, toweling sweat from her face. "It's amazing how much easier everything becomes when you stop fighting against yourself." The other students had indeed adjusted to the new dynamic more gracefully than Maya had anticipated. There had been a few awkward questions in the first week, well-meaning inquiries about whether she was okay or if she needed special accommodations. But Maya had addressed these directly and honestly. She explained that she didn't need to be treated differently, that her history made her stronger rather than more fragile, and that the best way to support her was to train with her as an equal. Jake, who had initially been mortified by his role in exposing Maya's secret, had become one of her most dedicated training partners. His guilt had transformed into genuine respect for her resilience, and he pushed himself to be more precise and controlled in his techniques, partly as a way of honoring what she had survived. "You know," he said to her one evening as they worked on defensive combinations, "I've been thinking about what happened, about your scars and everything. At first, I felt horrible because I thought I had done something terrible to you. But then I realized that maybe it needed to happen. Maybe you needed to stop hiding, and maybe we needed to see what real strength looks like." Maya paused in the middle of a defensive sequence, considering his words. "You might be right," she said thoughtfully. "I spent so many years convinced that my scars made me weak, made me less than other people. But training here, seeing how everyone has responded, has made me realize that survival is actually a form of strength. Not everyone who goes through what I went through makes it out the other side." Sarah had been listening to this conversation from across the studio, and she approached them during the next break. "Maya, I've been thinking about something, and I wanted to run it by you. We're coming up on our annual self-defense workshop for the community. It's a big event where we invite the public to come learn some basic techniques and safety awareness. I was wondering if you might consider speaking at it." Maya looked surprised. "Speaking? About what?" "About survival. About what real strength looks like. About the fact that self-defense isn't just physical techniques, it's also about the mental and emotional resilience that gets people through the worst experiences imaginable." Sarah paused, gauging Maya's reaction. "I think people need to hear your story. Not the graphic details, obviously, but the bigger message about refusing to let trauma define your limitations." The suggestion both terrified and intrigued Maya. The thought of standing in front of a room of strangers and talking about her past made her stomach clench with familiar anxiety. But there was also something appealing about the idea of using her experience to help others, of transforming her pain into something that could benefit someone else. "I don't know if I'm ready for something that public," Maya said honestly, "and I'm not sure what I would even say. I'm still figuring out how to talk about all of this myself." "That's exactly why your voice would be so powerful," Sarah replied. "You wouldn't be speaking as someone who has it all figured out, but as someone who is actively in the process of reclaiming her life. That's much more relatable and inspiring than hearing from someone who seems to have moved completely beyond their trauma." Maya spent the next few days thinking about Sarah's suggestion. She found herself imagining what she might say to a room full of strangers who were learning self-defense for their own reasons, some motivated by general safety concerns, others perhaps dealing with their own histories of victimization. What would she have wanted to hear when she was first starting her own journey towards healing? The answer came to her during a training session the following week. The class was working on a particularly challenging scenario involving multiple attackers, and Maya watched as Linda struggled with a sequence that required her to transition quickly between different defensive techniques. "I can't get this," Linda said in frustration after her fourth failed attempt. I keep getting confused and freezing up when I should be moving. Maya approached her training partner with an insight that surprised even her. The freezing isn't the problem. The freezing is your body's natural response to feeling overwhelmed. Instead of fighting against it, acknowledge it, and then make a conscious choice to move anyway. Fear doesn't have to stop you. It can actually give you the energy you need to act. Linda looked at Maya with new understanding. Is that how you do it? When you're in these scenarios, I mean? You always seem so calm under pressure. I'm not calm. I'm absolutely terrified most of the time. But I've learned that being afraid doesn't mean being helpless. Fear can be fuel if you know how to use it. As she spoke these words, Maya realized that she had found her message. This was what she could offer others. Not a story of victimhood, but a testament to the possibility of transformation. She could show people that survival wasn't about becoming fearless. It was about learning to act courageously in spite of fear. After class, she approached Sarah with a new resolve. "I'll do it," she said simply. "I'll speak at the workshop. I think I know what I want to say." Sarah smiled broadly. "I was hoping you'd come to that decision. What changed your mind?" "I realized that my story isn't really about what happened to me. It's about what I chose to do afterward. And maybe that's exactly what people need to hear, that no matter what you've been through, you still get to choose who you become next."
The community self-defense workshop was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon 3 weeks later, and Maya spent the intervening time carefully crafting what she wanted to say. She had never given a speech before, never deliberately put herself in a position where she would be the center of attention for a room full of strangers. The prospect was both terrifying and exhilarating. Sarah provided guidance on the structure and format, but she was careful to let Maya develop her own message in her own words. "The most powerful speeches come from authentic experience," she told Maya during one of their preparation sessions. "Don't worry about sounding polished or professional. Just speak from your heart about what you've learned." Maya's coworkers at the tech startup had been incredibly supportive when she told them about her upcoming speaking engagement. Jessica was particularly excited, having witnessed Maya's entire journey from the withdrawn, fearful woman who had first started taking self-defense classes to the confident person she was becoming. "I'm so proud of you," Jessica said over lunch one day. "A year ago, you could barely make eye contact with people, and now you're going to stand up in front of a crowd and share your story. It's incredible." "I'm still terrified," Maya admitted. "What if I freeze up? What if people ask questions I'm not ready to answer? What if hearing about my past traumatizes someone else who has similar experiences?" "Then you'll handle it," Jessica replied confidently. "You've handled everything else that's been thrown at you. Besides, Sarah will be there, and I'll be there too. You're not doing this alone." As the day of the workshop approached, Maya found herself experiencing a range of emotions she hadn't expected. There was anxiety, certainly, but also a growing sense of purpose. She had spent so many years feeling like her trauma was a burden, something that made her different and damaged. The opportunity to reframe her experience as a source of strength and wisdom felt like reclaiming power she hadn't even realized she had lost. The workshop was being held at a community center with a large multi-purpose room that could accommodate about 100 people. Sarah had promoted the event through local martial arts schools, women's organizations, and community safety groups. The response had been enthusiastic, with nearly 80 people registered to attend. Maya arrived early to help set up, partly because she wanted to be useful, but mostly because she needed time to acclimate to the space where she would be speaking. The room was larger than she had imagined, with rows of folding chairs facing a small raised platform where speakers would present. Seeing the actual setup made her stomach flutter with nerves, but it also made the event feel real and important. Sarah introduced Maya to several of the other presenters, a local police officer who would be speaking about situational awareness, a martial arts expert who would demonstrate basic self-defense techniques, and a counselor from a women's shelter who would discuss the psychological aspects of personal safety. Maya was struck by how seriously everyone took the mission of empowering people to protect themselves. "I'm excited to hear your perspective," the counselor, a woman named Patricia Williams, told Maya during the pre-event briefing. "I work with a lot of trauma survivors, and one of the biggest challenges they face is moving from a victim mindset to a survivor mindset.
Your story could be exactly what some of them need to hear. As people began filing into the room for the workshop, Maya was surprised by the diversity of the audience. There were women of all ages, from college students to senior citizens. There were also quite a few men, some who appeared to be there to support female family members, others who seemed genuinely interested in the self-defense instruction. She spotted several faces she recognized from her own training classes, including Marcus and Linda, who gave her encouraging waves from their seats. The workshop began with Sarah providing an overview of the afternoon's agenda and introducing the various speakers. When she got to Maya's portion of the program, she was deliberately vague about the specifics. One of our featured speakers today is Maya Chen, who has been training with us for several months. Maya will be sharing her personal perspective on what it means to reclaim your power after experiencing trauma. Her message about the relationship between survival and strength is one that I think will resonate with many of you. Maya felt her heart rate increase as Sarah spoke, but she also felt a familiar sense of determination settling over her. This was important work, and she was uniquely qualified to do it. Her scars, which she had hidden for so long, were actually her credentials for this moment. The first two presentations went well, with the police officer providing practical advice about staying alert in potentially dangerous situations, and the martial arts expert demonstrating some basic techniques that anyone could learn regardless of their physical condition. The audience was engaged and asked thoughtful questions after each presentation. Then it was Maya's turn. Sarah introduced her with warmth and respect, emphasizing her courage in agreeing to share her story. As Maya walked to the front of the room, she made a conscious decision to roll up her sleeves, fully exposing the scars on her arms for everyone to see. If she was going to talk about survival and strength, she was going to do it authentically. The room fell quiet as people took in the visible evidence of trauma on Maya's arms. But instead of the shock and pity she had feared, Maya saw something different in their faces: attention, respect, and a recognition that they were about to hear something important. My name is Maya Chen, and these scars tell a story about the worst thing that ever happened to me. But more importantly, they tell a story about what I chose to do afterwards. The room was completely silent, every person focused on her words. Maya took a deep breath and continued. When I was 14 years old, my stepfather began torturing me with cigarettes, lighters, and eventually fire itself. By the time I was 16 and the abuse finally ended, I had third-degree burns over 60% of my body and had survived 17 surgical procedures. She paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the audience. Several people gasped audibly, and I saw tears in more than a few eyes. For years after that, I believed that what happened to me had broken something in me permanently. I thought my scars made me weak, made me less than other people, made me someone who would always be defined by what had been done to me. I spent almost a decade hiding from the world and from myself. Maya looked out at the faces in front of her, seeing her own past reflected in some of their expressions: the fear, the shame, the feeling of being irreparably damaged by circumstances beyond their control. But then, I learned something that changed everything.
Maya paused for a moment, looking out at the sea of attentive faces in front of her. She could see that her opening had captured everyone's attention completely. Some people were leaning forward in their seats, others had tears in their eyes, and a few looked like they were struggling to process the magnitude of what she had just shared. But she also saw something else: recognition, understanding, and a hunger for whatever wisdom she might offer about surviving the unsurvivable. What I learned, Maya continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, is that survival itself is a form of resistance. Every day that I chose to keep living, every night that I went to sleep and woke up the next morning, every time I took a step forward instead of giving up, those were acts of rebellion against the person who tried to destroy me. She lifted her scarred arms slightly, making sure everyone could see them clearly. These scars used to be my source of shame. I wore long sleeves in 90-degree weather, avoided swimming pools and beaches,
turned down social invitations because I was terrified someone might see them and ask questions. I let my fear of other people's reactions control every aspect of my life. Maya began walking slowly across the front of the room, making eye contact with different sections of the audience as she spoke. But hiding from my scars was really hiding from my own strength. Because these marks aren't evidence of my weakness, they're proof that I survived something that was meant to kill me. They're a testament to my body's ability to heal, to my mind's capacity to endure, and to my spirit's refusal to be extinguished. A woman in the third row was openly crying now, and Maya could see recognition in her eyes, the look of someone who understood exactly what it meant to carry invisible wounds alongside visible ones. 6 months ago, I decided to take a self-defense class. Not because I thought I was weak, but because I was tired of being afraid. Tired of jumping every time someone walked up behind me. Tired of checking locks 3 times before going to bed. Tired of living my life in a constant state of hypervigilance and fear. She gestured towards Sarah, who was standing at the back of the room with an expression of pure pride on her face. What I discovered in that training studio was something I had never expected. I was already strong. Not just physically, though the training helped with that too, but mentally and emotionally. The same qualities that had gotten me through years of abuse and recovery, persistence, adaptability, the ability to keep fighting when everything seems hopeless, those were exactly the qualities that made me a good self-defense student. Maya stopped walking and faced the audience directly. Here's what I want you to understand. If you've survived trauma, if you've been through something that tried to break you, and you're still here, still breathing, still moving forward, you're already a fighter. You already have the most important tools for self-defense because you know what it means to refuse to give up. The room was completely silent, except for the occasional sound of someone sniffling or shifting in their chair. Maya could feel the intensity of their attention, and she knew that her message was landing exactly as she had hoped it would. Self-defense isn't really about learning to throw the perfect punch or execute a flawless escape technique. Those skills are important, and they're definitely worth learning. But the foundation of self-defense is the mindset that says, I have the right to exist safely in this world, and I will do whatever it takes to protect that right. Maya paused to take a sip of water, using the moment to gather her thoughts for the next part of her speech. She had decided to share something she had never told anyone before, not even Sarah or Jessica. I want to tell you about the moment I knew I was going to survive, she said, her voice taking on a more intimate tone. I was in the hospital about 3 weeks after the worst of the abuse. I had been unconscious for days after the final attack, and when I woke up, I couldn't move most of my body because of the pain and the bandages and the medical equipment. I couldn't speak because of the breathing tube they had put in. The audience was hanging on every word, and I could see several people reaching for tissues or dabbing at their eyes. A nurse came in to check on me, and she must have seen the fear in my eyes because she stopped what she was doing and just sat with me for a minute. Then she said something I'll never forget. Honey, you're still here. After everything that happened to you, you're still here. That means you're stronger than whatever tried to destroy you. Maya felt tears pricking at her own eyes as she remembered that moment, but she pushed forward. It took me years to really understand what she meant, but I think I finally do. Strength isn't about being invulnerable or fearless. Strength is about showing up anyway, even when you're scared. It's about choosing to keep going when everything in your world has fallen apart. It's about believing that you deserve better, even when someone has tried to convince you that you don't. She looked around the room again, making sure to include everyone in her message. Some of you are here because you want to feel safer walking alone at night. Others are here because you've had scary encounters and want to be better prepared. And some of you are here because you've already survived things that most people can't imagine. Maya's voice grew stronger and more passionate as she approached the climax of her speech. The person who hurt me wanted to leave me broken, scared, and convinced that I was powerless. Instead, he accidentally taught me that I could survive anything. He showed me depths of strength I never knew I had. He proved to me that my spirit was unbreakable, even when my body was damaged. Maya raised her scarred arms again, and this time she smiled as she did it. So now, when I look at these scars, I don't see shame. I see victory. I see evidence of a battle that I won, not through violence or revenge, but through the simple, radical act of refusing to disappear. The room erupted in spontaneous applause, and Maya was surprised to see that nearly everyone was on their feet, giving her a standing ovation that seemed to go on forever.
The standing ovation continued for what felt like several minutes, though Maya later learned it had lasted less than one. She stood at the front of the room, overwhelmed by the intensity of the response and the emotional energy radiating from the audience. As the applause finally began to die down and people returned to their seats, Maya could see that her words had affected the room in a profound way. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice slightly hoarse from emotion. "I know that was heavy, and I appreciate you staying with me through it. I want to open this up for questions now, but I also want to say that if anything I've shared has brought up difficult feelings for you, please don't hesitate to speak with Dr. Williams after the workshop. She's much better equipped than I am to provide professional support." The first hand that went up belonged to a woman who appeared to be in her 50s, sitting in the front row. When Maya nodded to her, she stood up, visibly emotional. "Thank you for sharing your story with us," the woman began, her voice shaking slightly. "I'm a survivor of domestic violence, and I've been struggling with whether to take self-defense classes because I wasn't sure I was strong enough. Your words have shown me that I already am strong. I just need to learn how to channel that strength." Maya felt a surge of warmth at the woman's response. You absolutely are strong. The fact that you're here, that you're considering ways to protect yourself, that you've survived whatever brought you to this point, all of that takes incredible courage. The self-defense training will just give you some practical tools to go with the strength you already have. The next question came from a young man who looked to be college-aged. "I'm here because my girlfriend asked me to come, and I'll be honest, I didn't really understand why this stuff was so important to her. But listening to you speak has made me realize how much courage it takes for people to heal from trauma and put themselves in potentially vulnerable situations like training. I guess my question is, how can those of us who haven't been through what you've been through be better supporters?" Maya appreciated the thoughtfulness of his question. "I think the most important thing is to treat survivors as whole people, not just as their trauma. Don't assume we're fragile or that we need special protection. Ask us what we need, rather than making assumptions about what would be helpful. And most importantly, recognize that healing isn't a linear process. Someone can be strong and vulnerable at the same time, confident in some areas and scared in others." A middle-aged woman raised her hand next. "My daughter is starting college next month, and I'm terrified for her safety. How do I teach her to be strong without making her paranoid? How do I prepare her for potential dangers without destroying her trust in the world?" This question resonated with Maya because she remembered her own transition to independence after aging out of foster care. "I think the key is teaching her to trust her instincts while also giving her practical tools. Help her understand that being aware of potential dangers isn't the same as being afraid all the time. Teach her that she has the right to remove herself from situations that don't feel safe,
even if she can't articulate exactly why. And most importantly, make sure she knows that if something bad does happen, it won't be her fault and you'll be there to support her recovery. The questions continued for another 20 minutes, covering topics from specific self-defense techniques to broader discussions about healing from trauma. Maya was surprised by how comfortable she felt answering them, and how naturally the wisdom she had gained through her own experiences seemed to translate into advice for others. One of the last questions came from Linda, Maya's training partner from the studio. Maya, you've talked about how your perspective on your scars changed from seeing them as evidence of weakness to seeing them as proof of strength. But was there a specific moment when that shift happened, or was it gradual? Maya thought carefully before answering. It was both, she said finally. There were specific moments, like when my shirt tore during training, and I realized the world didn't end when people saw my scars, that felt like breakthrough moments. But the overall shift was gradual, built through countless small acts of courage. Every day I chose to go to class despite being afraid, every time I pushed myself to try a new technique, every conversation I had with fellow students who treated me with respect rather than pity. All of those moments added up to a fundamental change in how I see myself. She paused, then added, I think healing happens in layers. You don't just wake up one day completely transformed, but if you keep showing up, keep pushing yourself gently towards growth, you start to notice that the person you were 6 months ago couldn't have done what you're doing today, and that's how you know you're moving in the right direction. As the formal Q&A session concluded, Sarah returned to the front of the room to wrap up Maya's portion of the program. I want to thank Maya for her courage in sharing her story with us today, she said, and the room broke into applause again. Her message about the relationship between survival and strength is one that I hope stays with all of you as you continue your own journeys. But the real impact of Maya's speech became apparent during the break that followed. Instead of dispersing to get refreshments or chat casually, nearly half the audience formed a line to speak with Maya personally. Some wanted to share their own stories of survival, others had specific questions about healing or self-defense training, and many simply wanted to express their gratitude for her willingness to be so vulnerable and honest. Dr. Williams approached Maya during this informal reception period. That was one of the most powerful presentations about trauma recovery I've ever heard. Have you ever considered doing peer counseling or advocacy work? Your ability to reframe trauma as a source of strength rather than just damage could help so many people. Maya was intrigued by the suggestion. I've never really thought about it as something I could do professionally. I'm still learning myself. The best advocates usually are, Dr. Williams replied with a smile. People don't need to hear from someone who has completely moved past their trauma. They need to hear from someone who is actively, successfully living with it and building a meaningful life despite it. That's exactly what you're doing.
The weeks following Maya's speech at the community workshop brought changes she hadn't anticipated. Word of her presentation had spread through local networks of counselors, social workers, and victim advocates, and Maya found herself receiving invitations to speak at other events. A women's shelter asked if she would consider talking to their residents about rebuilding life after trauma. A support group for burn survivors wanted to know if she would share her perspective on moving beyond victim identity. Even her own workplace's employee resource group for women requested a presentation on resilience and personal empowerment. At first, Maya was hesitant to accept these opportunities. Speaking once had been terrifying enough. The thought of making it a regular activity felt overwhelming. But Sarah encouraged her to consider the impact she could have. You found your voice, Sarah told her during one of their training sessions, and it's a voice that people desperately need to hear. You don't have to say yes to everything, but think about the woman you were 6 months ago. Wouldn't you have benefited from hearing someone like the person you've become? Maya knew Sarah was right. She remembered the isolation she had felt during her early recovery, the sense that no one could possibly understand what she was going through. She remembered the desperate search for stories of people who had not just survived trauma, but had actually thrived despite it. If she could provide that example for even one person, perhaps the discomfort of public speaking was worth it. She decided to start small, accepting an invitation to speak at a support group for trauma survivors that met at the community center where the workshop had been held. The group was much smaller, only about 15 people, but Maya found the intimacy more challenging in some ways than the larger audience had been. These weren't people who were curious about trauma recovery in the abstract. These were individuals living with their own daily struggles, their own scars, both visible and hidden. The group facilitator, a therapist named Dr. Rebecca Martinez, introduced Maya and explained that she would be sharing her perspective on post-traumatic growth, the concept that people could not only recover from trauma, but actually develop new strengths as a result of their experiences. I want to start by acknowledging that what I'm about to share might be difficult for some of you to hear, Maya began, addressing the small circle of participants. The idea that trauma can lead to growth can feel invalidating when you're in the midst of pain and struggle. I'm not here to minimize anyone's suffering or to suggest that what happened to any of us was somehow worth it because of what we learned. What I want to share is simply my own experience of how I began to reclaim my life, and maybe some of it will resonate with your own journey. She looked around the circle, noting the mix of ages and backgrounds represented. There was an elderly man whose hands shook slightly, possibly a veteran dealing with PTSD, a woman about Maya's age who kept her arms crossed protectively over her chest, a teenager who looked like she would rather be anywhere in the world. Each face told a story of survival, and Maya felt the familiar combination of humility and determination that came with addressing fellow survivors. For years after my abuse ended, I defined myself entirely by what had been done to me. I was the girl who had been tortured by her stepfather. That was my identity, my explanation for every limitation in my life, my excuse for why I couldn't do things that other people seemed to manage easily. And in some ways, that identity served a purpose. It gave me a framework for understanding my struggles and justified the extra care I needed during recovery. The woman with crossed arms nodded almost imperceptibly, and Maya sensed recognition there. But at some point I realized that while trauma had shaped me, it didn't have to define the boundaries of who I could become. The same qualities that helped me survive, persistence, adaptability, the ability to endure pain, those were actually strengths that I could apply to building the life I wanted. A man in his 30s raised his hand tentatively. How do you know when you're ready to make that shift? I mean, how do you know when you're strong enough to stop thinking of yourself as a victim? Maya appreciated the question because it got to the heart of something she had struggled with herself. I don't think it's about being strong enough, she replied thoughtfully. I think it's about being tired enough of living in a box defined by someone else's actions. For me, the turning point came when I realized I was more afraid of staying stuck than I was of trying to change. She paused, then added, and I want to be clear, choosing to move beyond victim identity doesn't mean pretending the trauma didn't happen or minimizing its impact. I still have days when the past feels overwhelming. The difference is that now I also have days when I feel powerful, capable, and excited about my future. The goal isn't to eliminate the difficult days, but to create space for the good ones too. The session continued for another hour, with participants sharing their own struggles and insights. Maya was struck by the intelligence and resilience of the group members and by how much she learned from their perspectives. A veteran talked about how his PTSD had taught him to be more present and appreciative of peaceful moments. A domestic violence survivor shared how her experience had led her to become an advocate for other women in similar situations. The teenager, who had initially seemed reluctant to participate, eventually opened up about how surviving childhood abuse had given her unusual emotional maturity and empathy for others. By the time the session ended, Maya realized that something important had happened. She had stopped thinking of herself as someone who had survived trauma and was now helping others. Instead, she saw herself as part of a community of survivors who were all helping each other heal and grow. The distinction might seem small, but to Maya it felt profound. She wasn't separate from or superior to the people she was speaking to. She was one of them, and they were all in this journey together. After the group session, Dr. Martinez approached Maya with an unexpected proposition. Have you considered going back to school for counseling or social work? You have a natural gift for connecting with trauma survivors, and your lived experience combined with proper training could be incredibly effective as a therapist.
Maya was surprised by the suggestion. She had never thought about changing careers, especially not to something that would require her to engage with trauma on a daily basis. I don't know, she said honestly. Wouldn't working with trauma survivors all the time be emotionally exhausting? I'm still working on my own healing. The best trauma therapists are often people who have done their own work around similar issues, Dr. Martinez replied. Obviously, you'd need to maintain clear boundaries and continue your own therapy and self-care, but your ability to offer hope without minimizing pain is exactly what people need to hear. Think about it. You don't have to make any decisions right now, but consider whether this might be a way to turn your experiences into something that serves both you and others. Over the following weeks, Maya found herself thinking more and more about Dr. Martinez's suggestion. She had always assumed that her computer science career was her path forward, a way to build a stable, independent life away from the chaos of her past. But her recent experiences speaking to groups had awakened something in her that she hadn't expected, a sense of purpose that went beyond personal healing. She began researching graduate programs in counseling psychology, particularly ones with specializations in trauma recovery. The idea of returning to school was daunting. It would mean taking off student loans again, spending evenings and weekends in classes, and committing to several years of intensive study. But it would also mean developing the skills to help other survivors in a professional capacity, turning her hard-won wisdom into a career that could make a real difference. The decision crystallized for Maya during what would become her final advanced self-defense class at Sarah's studio. She had decided to transition to a maintenance schedule of training rather than continuing with the intensive program, feeling confident that she had developed the skills and mindset she needed for personal safety. But more than that, she was ready to focus her energy on this new direction her life was taking. I'm going to miss having you in regular classes, Sarah told her after their final session together. You've become such an inspiration to the other students, but I'm excited about this new path you're considering. I think you could help a lot of people. Maya smiled, looking around the studio that had been such an important part of her healing journey. I never expected that learning to defend my body would teach me so much about defending my spirit, she said. But I guess that's what real strength is. Protecting not just your physical safety, but your right to take up space in the world, to have dreams and goals, and a future that isn't defined by your past.
2 years later, Maya stood in front of another group of trauma survivors. But this time, the context was completely different. She was no longer a survivor sharing her personal story as an act of courage. She was a licensed clinical social worker leading a therapy group at the county's newest trauma recovery center. The journey from that terrifying moment when her shirt tore in self-defense class to this professional role had been challenging, transformative, and ultimately fulfilling in ways she never could have imagined. The graduate program had been everything Dr. Martinez had suggested it would be: intellectually demanding, emotionally challenging, and deeply rewarding. Maya had specialized in trauma-informed care with a focus on post-traumatic growth, learning to combine her lived experience with evidence-based therapeutic techniques. She had discovered that her intuitive understanding of trauma responses, developed through years of managing her own recovery, translated remarkably well to helping others navigate their healing journeys. Her thesis project had examined the relationship between physical empowerment activities like self-defense training and psychological recovery from interpersonal trauma. The research had been personal for Maya, but it had also contributed valuable insights to the field. She had been able to demonstrate statistically significant improvements in self-efficacy, body autonomy, and overall well-being among trauma survivors who participated in carefully structured physical training programs. Today, I want to talk about reclaiming your narrative, Maya said to the 8 women in her current therapy group. The faces looking back at her showed the familiar mixture of pain, hope, and wariness that she had learned to recognize in trauma survivors. One of the most insidious effects of abuse is the way it can hijack your story, making you believe that what happened to you is the most important or defining thing about who you are. She was wearing a short-sleeved blouse, her scars clearly visible as always. Early in her career, she had made the conscious decision to never hide her physical markers of survival when working with clients. The scars served as a form of credibility, a visible reminder that healing was possible even after the most severe trauma. I want each of you to think about how you introduce yourself to new people, Maya said. Do you lead with your trauma, either directly or indirectly?
Do you find yourself explaining your limitations, your fears, your triggers before you mention your strengths, your interests, your dreams? A woman named Jennifer, who was about 6 months into her recovery from domestic violence, raised her hand tentatively. I do that all the time. I realize I'm always preparing people for my dysfunction instead of showing them who I really am. Maya nodded encouragingly. That's a really important insight, Jennifer, and it makes perfect sense. When you've been hurt badly, it feels safer to manage people's expectations than to risk being vulnerable. But what happens when we lead with our limitations is that we start to believe they're the most true things about us. Another group member, Sarah, coincidentally sharing the same name as Maya's former self-defense instructor, spoke up. But isn't it important to be honest about what we've been through? I mean, my PTSD affects my relationships, my work, everything. How do I acknowledge that without making it my whole identity? It was exactly the kind of nuanced question that Maya had learned to appreciate in her work. Absolutely, Sarah. I'm not suggesting we pretend trauma doesn't have ongoing effects or that we shouldn't be honest about our needs and boundaries. What I'm talking about is the difference between saying, I'm a survivor of domestic violence who needs certain accommodations versus I'm a survivor of domestic violence. The first acknowledges your experience as part of your story. The second makes it the headline. Maya walked over to the whiteboard and wrote 2 columns, trauma defined and survivor integrated. Under the first column, she listed phrases like, I can't, I'm broken, I'm too damaged, I'll never be normal. Under the second, she wrote, I've survived, I'm learning, I have valuable perspectives, I'm becoming who I want to be. The goal isn't to eliminate trauma from your identity, she explained, but to integrate it as one important part of a much larger, richer story. You are not just what happened to you, you're also what you chose to do afterward. As the group session continued, Maya found herself thinking about her own journey from that frightened young woman hiding behind long sleeves to the confident professional she had become. The transformation hadn't been linear or easy, and there were still days when the past felt overwhelming, but she had learned to hold multiple truths simultaneously. She was a survivor of severe trauma, and she was also a successful therapist, a valued colleague, a loyal friend, and a woman with dreams and ambitions that extended far beyond her recovery. After the group ended, Maya returned to her office to prepare for her next client, a teenage girl whose burns from a house fire had left her struggling with body image and social anxiety. As she reviewed the case notes, Maya reflected on how her own scars had become not just markers of survival, but tools for connection and healing. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Jessica, her longtime friend and colleague from the tech company where Maya had worked before changing careers. Saw the article about the trauma center in the newspaper. So proud of what you've built. Lunch this weekend to celebrate? Maya smiled, typing back her acceptance. She thought about all the people who had been part of her journey. Sarah, her first self-defense instructor, who had created a safe space for Maya to discover her strength. Dr. Martinez and Dr. Williams, who had helped her see that her experiences could serve others. Her professors and supervisors who had guided her professional development, and her clients who taught her something new about resilience every single day. But perhaps most importantly, Maya thought about her younger self, the scared, scarred teenager who had believed that her life was essentially over, that she would never be anything more than a victim of someone else's cruelty. If she could somehow reach back through time and speak to that girl, Maya knew exactly what she would say. The person who hurt you wanted to convince you that you were powerless, that you were broken, that you would never be whole again. He was wrong about all of it. You were going to survive not just his attacks, but also the hospital stays, the surgeries, the nightmares, the years of feeling like damaged goods. You are going to build a life that matters, not despite what happened to you, but incorporating the strength you discovered and surviving it. Your scars will become your credentials. Your pain will become your pathway to helping others. Your survival will become your service to the world. The warrior you need to become is already inside you. She's the part of you that refuses to give up, even when everything seems hopeless. Trust her. Follow her. Let her lead you home to yourself. As Maya prepared for her next session, she rolled up her sleeves and smiled at the familiar sight of her scarred arms. They would always be part of her story, but they were no longer the most important part. They were simply evidence of a battle she had won, a journey she had completed, and a strength she had claimed as her own. The warrior had found her way. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.